Hello, I'm Alice McVeigh, and thank you for joining me at the first of, we hope, many Orpington Literary Festivals. First of all, I'm just going to be quick. There's a bit about me here in this video.
So, Alice, can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration for your novels?
Yes, the inspiration was really quite different for all of them. I first got inspired to write, well, I wrote from a young age. I wrote from about the age of 4, and I wrote my first rubbish novel when I was 13. I wrote it for my sister, who was very patient with me, and edited it. She is an editor, so she's great. But it was a really, really rubbish novel. If you sort of imagine it was like Enid Blyton, sort of school stories. Anyway, so gradually I started to play the cello, obviously, and then I became fascinated by the whole orchestra, the whole ethos of an orchestra, about what an orchestra was like. And the orchestra is sort of a universe in microcosm. You've got all different types of people. It's not just sort of posh classical people, and you get them put very close proximity, like about a meter, only now it's 2 meters, and basically you got all these people, and they are all dealing with their own issues. They're all under stress because the little red light goes on and you've got to perform. Anyway, and all of these people under this kind of stress, and very often other kinds of stress as well. And we did a lot of touring. And anyway, I got fascinated by the way these different orchestra types got on or didn't get on. And so I wrote a novel, and I thought, this isn't too bad because I'm like that, I'm positive. And I sent it off to 3 agents, and the 3rd agent accepted it. And then a month later, she got me a contract with a top publisher, and I just thought, this is easy. Well, I'm here to tell you it isn't easy. It's really very hard. I was just incredibly, unbelievably, stupendously lucky. So my first 2 novels were published by the same publisher, and then after that I got a little sort of depressed with IVF and various other things, and my 3rd novel was really pretty bad. It wasn't as bad as when I was 13, but it was not very great. So I didn't have any inspiration for a long time after that. I was mostly ghostwriting, and ghostwriting is another chapter, but I won't go into it. So the next bit of inspiration I got, which was very, very odd, was for this book, the one that was published in February by Unbound. And basically what happened with this book was I was meditating with my energy healer, and she's amazing, Liz Petswood. And I was meditating when I got a kind of vision, which was very, very strange. I imagined that I was on top of the ground. Well, you are, aren't you? I was walking along the ground when I suddenly saw deep below me, through a sort of metallic shaft, a young man imprisoned in a chair. And when I came out of this meditation, I said to my energy healer, I said, I just had something really strange happen to me. And she said, well, you never know, it might spark your creativity. And I thought, well, I doubt that. But anyway, it did. And the reason it did was because of the character of the fellow in the chair. And once I'd imagined him, or whether I imagined him or met him, I don't know, I just couldn't sort of forget about it. So I did wind up writing, and I thought, I'm a bit old for this now, and had my go, and had my number 35 in the bestsellers, and yeah, that was in the past. But I had to write it, and I'm glad I wrote it. It's done phenomenally well, really. So I'm incredibly proud of Last Star Standing and my hero. Here it is, blah, 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 goes with my shirt. And yes, another question, yes.
So you've described this kind of transition from these two books about orchestral life and the sort of intimate history of an orchestra, from that to a very different world of sci-fi. What were the challenges in that transition? Was it difficult?
Oh, Polly, there were so many challenges. It isn't even true. It was absolutely the opposite of my first experience. I did not write off to agents and get them climbing over each other trying to sign me. Instead, I wrote off to agents with deafening silence, and I knew the book was good. So I thought, what's wrong with this? And finally, I got back some fantastic things saying, oh, we think it's wonderful, we think it's really great, but maybe not the moment for this at this time, or things like that. And I sort of thought, right, this is going to be hard. But I didn't realize, because I was thick, that the reason it was hard wasn't the agent's fault. They were correct. The book needed a lot of work. The reason it still needed a lot of work, the reason why I wasn't so successful so quickly at all, was because I didn't really understand the genre. I hadn't really read sci-fi except for The Handmaid's Tale in 1984. I just felt I had to write it because I had this encounter with this character, and I made all kinds of mistakes. So what happened was, when I did get my publisher, Unbound published it, and they said, right, you're going to go to this developmental editor. I'm going, developmental editor? I do that for a living. I'm a ghostwriter, developmental. I don't need that. Oh, ridiculous, stupid, crazy people. Anyway, but they insisted, and they were right. And I got the best developmental editor in the country, I do believe. She's very famous. And she sat me down and she said, basically, this is not a science fiction book. She said, if you're going to write it as science fiction, you're going to have to change some things. You're going to have to rewrite this. You're going to have to change this. You're going to have to build that up. And I was just furious. I was just, oh, God, I didn't want to do that. But I'm not as stupid as I look, because I did do it. And the book began to glitter. And it just changed completely. And I was just amazed, because she understood the genre in a way that I did not. I understood writing, but that's a different thing from marketing, a different thing from selling, a different thing from lots of things.
So can you just say a bit more then about what did she help you with? What were you getting wrong?
I was getting everything wrong. I started off in the present tense. I wanted that immediacy. It's like a thriller. It's a thrilling kind of book. It's action adventure in many ways, and not a dull page. And I wanted that immediacy, so I wanted it in first person, present. And she said, no, your style of writing doesn't work with that. And you get much more power if you went into the past tense. And it took me a long time to accept that. There were also other problems I had. There were problems with pacing that I hadn't realized. But there were also problems about, it's not military or tough science fiction. It's basically all character driven. But there were things that I just sort of left dangling, like, well, the DNA was altered. Well, you can't do that in science fiction. That means you get stroppy letters and people going, you can't just do that. That wouldn't work. And so she was aware of all these issues that I was not aware of. And she just said, you've got to clarify that. You've got to decide what that means. The whole thing was just completely, it had a beginning of inspiration, true inspiration, but I made so many mistakes.
Houston now controlling.
I have not been found.
you've entered into a field that's often referred to as dystopian
Yeah.
fiction. Is that...
That was a bad timing. That was bad timing because I've got a friend of mine who's also a writer, a really good writer, and she got taken up by Tor, who's the science fiction publisher. And Tor has postponed her dystopian novel for another 2 years because basically all of us have been living through dystopian reality, and that doesn't mean we want to read about it. We really don't. It's a hard sell out there at the moment. If you say it's dystopian, I've started calling it other things like action adventure, which it is. But basically, it is based in a dystopian world because it was 2094 when it was set, and that made it hard. I would not necessarily recommend, rushing out with your dystopian book at the moment. I would recommend rushing out with maybe just an ordinary thriller or romance or something.
But you've made a conscious decision to change your name for this book.
Yes.
You've got a pseudonym. Is that for marketing reasons, or to do with your readership, or to do with your personality?
Both, really, both, really. To be honest, it's both. Spalding Taylor is still me. My name is Alice Spalding Taylor McVeigh, which sounds a bit poncy, but there it is. But no, it's still me, but it's a different part of me, and it's sexually ambiguous. So I could be seen to be a man. And that's really important for the sci-fi genre because a lot of men who love sci-fi just have a sort of resistance to reading a book by somebody called Alice. So that was one reason. The other reason was I didn't want to confuse people. I'd written these books about the secret life of an orchestra, contemporary fiction, and I didn't think there was going to be a massive number of people who wanted to read action, adventure, thriller, and that kind of contemporary, more literary fiction, so I thought I'd keep them separate. And I've got another book coming out, which is historical fiction, and I've kept my Alice McVeigh name for that. So it does make life a little bit complicated, but I still think I was probably, well, everybody says I was wise to do it, including my publisher, so that was why.
But a lot of men like, not to be too much of a cliche here, but they like action, they like gadgets, devices, and all those things associated with the sort of traditional form of sci-fi.
Yeah.
Your book is really more of a psychological thriller, isn't it? I guess.
I think that's putting it a bit strongly. I don't know how much of a psychological. It's action adventure. It's character driven. It's one man's journey in many ways, but it's also got lots of action and lots of things going on. It's basically, he's always on some mission or other, and in that respect as well, it's not as literary as my previous work.
But it does appeal to women as well.
Well, it seems to, yes. I'm not so sure the cover does, but the actual book does, yes, absolutely. I've had some wonderful feedback from that way, and also reviews. So.
Do you want to say a bit more about your next
Well, yes, I would like to say a bit about it if there's time. It's just basically, my inspiration for that came many, many years ago. I've always been a Jane Austen freak, and I know her novels by heart. Anyway, when I had my starry agent, who also had a Booker Prize-winning novelist, so I was like one of the minnows, then I said to her, I've always wanted to write a prequel to Lady Susan by Jane Austen, because I think that she would have been fascinating as a younger woman. And she said, oh gosh, no, too genre, not you at all, just don't even think about it. But I couldn't stop thinking about it, so, a bit like Aidan really, the lead character in my science fiction book. So in the end I did write it. People say, oh, it's a good lockdown project, but in fact I wrote it several years before lockdown. And I just hadn't sort of got enough courage to send it out there. But I have now, thanks to really Last Star Standing, and it's got a fantastic, amazing review from Book Life, which gave it 10 out of 10. This is Publishers Weekly's prize competition, so it may be in with a small chance of that. But I'm publishing it it's being published on the 30th of June, so I'm kind of at the moment I'm dealing with marketing that as well. So.
Well, it's obvious that you're comfortable writing in a range of different genres, several over your lifetime. Tell us a little bit about how does it feel to be working in different genres, perhaps even at the same time, or do you cut them off one from another as you're writing? How do you handle that?
I think I handled it very badly. I mean, sometimes when I was writing Last Star Standing, then my editor goes, "It's odd here, but you seem to have stopped using contractions." And I'm, oh, right, yes, I'm still stuck in the Regency. Yes, it's not that that Jane Austen didn't write forsooth and so forth and egad, but there is a style of her writing. There's a rhythm, there's a poetry, in fact, in her writing, and to try to capture that is very difficult and very, very rewarding once you get it right, but also hard. And in the same way, you'll recall that I was struggling with the genre of science fiction, soft science fiction, obviously not military science fiction, and I was struggling with that anyway because of my developmental editor sort of saying, this is not really, it's not marketable the way it is. And if you really want to make it succeed, you've got to do some rewriting, if you remember. So, yeah, I was sort of stuck in the middle. I was sort of like my accent, really. It's often described as stuck in the middle of the ocean. Americans think I sound British, and British people think that's hilarious. So I don't know. I can get stuck in a genre. The one possibly I feel most at home in was when I was writing about orchestras because... of course, I lived it. Orchestras have been part of my life since forever. And also because I wasn't striving to write in a different century in terms of the prose, so it was pretty much easy.
And Last Star Standing is set in Australia. Why did you choose Australia? Did that affect anything about the way people talked? That's
a really good question. I picked my hero to be half Indigenous Australian because I wanted him to feel like an outsider. I've always felt a bit like an outsider because, well, of course, I have been. I grew up in Asia and I was American embassy person. And then I went back to America. I didn't feel properly American. I didn't feel like I fit in. And then I came to Britain and I love Britain, but I'm never really going to be British. I'm always going to not quite be part of it. So I wanted to feel into that, to get into that vibe of somebody who really was an outsider. And of course, he didn't know his father was. He'd never met his mother either. He'd been he'd been adopted. So yeah, I think that was why I did it. Really, I also wanted something that felt very other. I wanted to explore the whole idea of being male because I'm writing the first person as a male narrator. That's a big challenge, especially if you're very, very female, which I happen to be. And so I found that exercise of imagination completely fascinating. And I don't know if I'd do it again because, again, it was a bit like the accents and going from the Regency to whatnot. It was very, very challenging, but incredibly fulfilling in another way. And I think it taught me a lot.
So which genres are hot at the moment?
Oh gosh, good question. The ones which are hot are ones that I cannot even imagine writing in. There's something called paranormal horror, which is very big. And there's also something called reverse harem, which sounds interesting. Basically, one woman pursued by zillions of men. So this sort of seems like wish fulfillment to me on the part of female readers. What's definitely not big is dystopian. I think I put that up. I said that already. And the biggest seller of all, as is always true, and this again is probably wish fulfillment, is romance. So if you want to make a bomb, you want to write romance. I've got friends who churn out a romance a month, and I take my hats off to them because I just think there is no way I could ever do that. And of course, it is a formula, so you do have a formula to follow, but it's still very, very hard.
And do you intend to make a series from any of these books?
Well, I've got an idea in mind of a sequel to Last Star Standing, but I haven't really got going on that yet. Instead, I've actually decided to do a series of the Jane Austen books, and I've already completed the second one. So that will probably come out later this year or maybe early next year. So that's just something I find really relaxing, really. I'm sort of into the groove of doing that at the moment, so yeah. But no, I'm not going to be writing paranormal horror, no.
Okay. So let's think a little bit about some of the mechanics of the book publishing world today. And where do you see that going in terms of the different sorts of books, electronic books and so on? How do you see that panning out in the future?
That's a difficult question, actually. Must be one of the world experts, so I'm certainly not alone, because I've got friends in the same situation, in that I was published by a Big Five publisher at vast expense and sold the film rights to Channel 4 of my first novel. And then the third time I was published, really, because I was published with them more than once. Then I was with a small publisher, and I've actually turned down 2 publishers for Susan, a Jane Austen prequel, because I really do feel I've got an idea about how to do it myself. And this may be mad, so watch this space. But anyway, so I'm one of the many world experts on having been published by a big publisher, by a small publisher, and self-published. And I think it's not something I would never have done until about 10 years ago, maybe, because it was very much looked down upon and the standard was pretty low. But now some of the really good publishers, really amazing authors and bestsellers are thinking, I can do that, and why should I pay the publisher 50% commission? Why should they get half of everything I earn when all they do these days is shove in a template and out comes the book? So yes, it's interesting. I found, I think you are very cosseted if you're with a Big Five publisher. You know, they get you on BBC Three, they get you on BBC Four, they get you interviews. I got reviews in the Daily Telegraph and the Sunday Times, and you can just whistle for that these days. They don't even do book reviews. On the whole, being with a small publisher was interesting. They work very hard, but they're very overworked. They publish about 75 books a year. And it's really hard for a small staff to deal with all that. So it was halfway to being self-published in that you had to do a lot of the marketing, a lot of the pushing yourself, a lot of the getting out there and telling people about it yourself. So that's one of the reasons why I think that self-publishing is not that big of a step, that big of a leap. That doesn't take that much courage. And that's why I turned down the offers that I did get. Even the advances. So yeah, it's but in terms of the whole industry is changing so fast. It's changing hugely fast. And in the old days, ebooks were nowhere and everything was real books. Well, ebooks lead everything now. And some people don't even bother with publishing real books because it's only the older people, older than me, who sort of insist upon them. The other thing which is concerning, I think, is the rise of gaming. By which I mean that I think young people are not really into reading novels. And I can see that when the sort of 40-somethings now are gone, that novels may be a completely endangered species, really. So I am concerned about the long-term future, but in the short-term future, it's still looking very bright.
So say a little bit more about what's involved in publishing your own book. Because the publisher, the established publisher, does, apart from just making it, they do 2 things really, don't they? They work with you on the content in some way, with copy editing, proofreading, and so on, and they do something towards the marketing and distribution that you've spoken about.
Yes.
So if you're publishing yourself, how do you cope with those parts of
Well, you're asking me a bit too early, really, because I haven't done it yet. But I've got a plan, and it's happening next month. So yes, I think the marketing, as I hinted, at a smaller or medium-sized publisher like Unbound is not going to be that major, and that's why I feel confident that I can do it. The actual editing and proofreading, as my husband is hinting here. He did most of it. He was absolutely amazing. And so did various friends of mine, and so did some professional people who I respect, who I hired for this book, my new book, Susan, the one I'm self-publishing. So yes, you feel the weight of responsibility on your shoulders. You're not being behind yourself, being proofread by somebody who does it for a living. So you've either got to be really certain of your abilities, and I'm not certain of my abilities of proofreading myself because I get distracted. But I can proofread other people, or else hire somebody. And I think really, the best idea is to hire somebody. So in terms of the actual production of the book, I think you've got to be willing and able to have help. And if you haven't got an amazing husband, then you've got to hire it. And the same thing with the cover, really. I mean, I've got friends who are very gifted at art, but their covers never really work. Designing a cover is quite a different proposition from painting a picture. And I think that kind of thing as well, you really got to outsource and not listen to what your mum says or what your aunt says or what your best friend says. I think you've got to be pretty brutally thorough about things like that.
And you said with the Last Star Standing, you had a very good developmental
She was stunning.
editor.
Sam Boyce.
What is the relationship between an author and somebody in that position?
Well, I'm an expert on that as well, because as a ghostwriter, I've had all kinds of relationships with people in that position. I've actually had to fire some clients, and I do think it is very difficult, because a book is your baby and you love it to bits, and somebody mucking about with your baby is not going to thrill most mothers or fathers. So you have to have complete faith and trust in the person that you have, the person that my publisher gave me in this case. And as I say, it took a while of throwing temper tantrums for me to accept it. But when I did accept it, then I accept that she changed my books for so much for the better. So I think you do have to have faith. If you're coming out on your own and you're auditioning your own editor, I think you've got to be, you have to have an extended period where it's not set in stone, where you can move on if it doesn't work. I've known the relationship go sour for several reasons. Sometimes it's ego on either side. Sometimes it's a genuine mismatch of expectations. In other words, the editor, has been hired to do a job of work, but the author sometimes thinks, well, you've got other clients, what about me? You're writing something for yourself, and I think that can be very difficult. Worst of all, however, and this can happen, is if you have different ideas for where the book is going, and that can be really, really hard. I sank 2 years of my life into one of the best books I've ever written, and it will never be published. It will never be published because I ghostwrote it for a woman who had been kidnapped by an Islamic cult, and when it was finished, she thanked me profusely and said it meant the world to her, but she couldn't bear the idea of anyone else ever reading about it. So that was 2 years of my life I'm never going to get back. So I think even though we worked together brilliantly, that left me feeling quite sad. But what I'm talking about with regard to mismatch of expectations is also whether the book, what Sam said to me, she said this book could go one of two ways. It could become completely hilarious and over the top, and you could just, take the mickey out of the genre, and in some places I kind of do. She said the other way is it could be really gritty action adventure with a serious and unusually important and compelling character. And of course, because I'd sort of fallen in love with this guy down this metallic shaft, I picked the second option. There's lots of humor in the book, but it's not, it's not a send-up. So basically what that tells you is that the books can go more than one way. Books can be written, and they can be written successfully in more than one way. And that's the kind of thing which makes the editor client, or the developmental editor, or the ghostwriter client relationship so interesting. In that you wind up having some discussions along those lines. And then there are characters. For example, I wrote a book for a client, and there was a character that she was wedded to that I just didn't think worked at all. And in the end, we compromised on that. I did soften the character down, but the character's still there, and to my mind slightly distorts the plot. But all you can really do in those sort of cases is to say, this is my opinion, but it's your book, and it's always going to be your book, just like the one who refused to publish it. And it's the author may not always be right, and that includes me when I'm the author, but they always get the last word.
So it's very much a collaborative process, and one that has to be treated with sensitivity on both sides, I guess.
Yeah, I think you can get very involved in it.
Yes,
you can get
indeed.
involved.
But the point about setting out expectations before you start
Oh,
or
I
get
think
too
that's
far
very,
in,
very important.
absolutely crucial, obviously.
Yeah, when I started out, I was a people pleaser, and it was just like, oh yes, of course I'll do extra hours, and of course I'll reduce my price, and now I mean, I'm if I really love somebody's writing, I will go the extra mile, but you still have to think about your family, you still have to think about what you're doing for yourself, you still have to not allow yourself to be taken for granted, and I think there's a happy medium, as with most things, with that.
So when you're writing your own books, do you get to a stage where you become a copy editor for yourself?
Well, I don't, because you're my copy editor. I copy edit his books, he copy edits mine. No, I think it's impossible to you're different, really. Simon is an academic. But I think if you're writing fiction, you are so emotionally entangled with it. You can't really edit it really well yourself. Even proofreading is hard. But I can do that for other people, but not for me. And I think that's really common. I know so many writers, and I know almost none of them who feel happy trusting themselves to do that. So no, I don't think so.
And do you ever look back over your old books?
Well, I am at the moment. That's yeah. I don't know if you'd remember that. My first two books are now out of print, and so I got the rights back from my story publisher, Ryan, and I'm currently reformatting and editing them. For example, there was a character, a not very admirable principal cellist in my first novel, who used to dismiss his girlfriends by fax. Now, I don't think that would happen these days, frankly. So that really ages the book. So that's not going to happen, but he's still going to do it because that's the kind of guy he is. And so yes, I'm going to have those on my website available to be bought, but I'm not sure when, probably July or August.
So I think that probably brings us to a natural end.
Great.
And
we hope you have some questions. So we hope A, that somebody's out there listening, and B, that hopefully something I've said might have inspired you to ask a question or to make a comment or something like that.
That was great, Alice. That was a really fascinating presentation, and I thought it was excellent, very inspiring as well. All of the different things that you went through, and we've got a few questions that have come through on the chat. So what I'll do is I'll just ask those to you while I can. One of the first ones that popped up I thought was really interesting was the characters that you write about. I mean, they wanted to know, are they modeled on people that you've met or people you know, or are they literally just sort of plucked out of your imagination?
Well, the main character of my speculative action adventure novel came to me in a very weird way, as I explained, and as you know, I think he came to me fully formed, and I think he just is who he is. I've tried to trace him through various things, and I honestly and truly think he was just a gift. But I have other characters in many of my novels. In fact, I got in quite a lot of trouble because my first two novels, as I mentioned, were about orchestras. I play in orchestras, professional orchestras. And I was touring the world with several orchestras, including the BBC Symphony and the Royal Philharmonic. And there were a couple of real characters, standout characters, some in really good ways and some in really not so good ways. And I have to say that some of those characters have been traced. In other words, people have actually said to me, was I X or I was Y, wasn't I? And I haven't known where to look. So I have to say that in the past, I was probably either less secure in my imagination or else more dominated by the people I've met, or simply less experienced because I was not so good at hiding people as maybe I thought I was. But in the case of Aidan, he was a gift. He just came to me. I still don't know exactly where. I almost feel I've got a friend who believes in this, and I don't. But sort of reincarnation, as if I might have known him in some other lifetime. If I believed in that, I would definitely believe that I had known him in some other lifetime. And I know that sounds really weird, but that's where I am with it.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think I can sort of understand where you're coming from with that. Absolutely. And I know when I introduced you, when we touched on yourself being a ghostwriter, and I think for people in the room, there's somebody mentioned they weren't quite sure what that was. Are you able to sort of explain slightly, in a bit more detail about ghostwriting?
I think ghostwriting is fascinating. I think it was slightly derailed me in some ways because I first got the story publisher and the story agent, and I sold the film rights and stuff, and I was flying really high. And then when the third book wasn't a bestseller because I was so depressed, then I decided, what am I going to do? I couldn't really go back into playing cello full time because I had this daughter that I'd waited 17 years for. So I went into ghostwriting, and I must say I had some fantastic connections to help me with that. Ghostwriting is fascinating, but it's creative in a completely different way. What you're doing is you're sublimating your own ego, your own passion, your own self-belief, your own vision for the book. And what you're doing is you're enabling, you're becoming an enabler, and you're enabling someone for their book to be fulfilled. And these are people, normally it's memoir, but not always. Sometimes they're famous, more often than not. And what they're doing is they have a story to tell, and no means of telling it. Not that they're stupid, but they don't happen to have been trained as writers, and they don't happen to have always read books or whatever it is. And so what you're doing is you really are helping them fulfill what really matters to them. And it's completely different from being a novelist, and yet you still have to be a really good writer. In fact, in some ways you have to be an even better writer, because if it's your novel, you not only have a dream about the plot, a vision about the characters, but you have the sort of pacing of the novel, the sort of word rhythm. All of that just comes normally, quite naturally. Whereas if you're dealing with someone else, even if it's someone you know fairly well, and normally it isn't, normally you just meet, or your agent sets you up with them or something, and you don't know them at all. You've got to feel your way in a really discreet way into their lives, into their background, into their goals, and into, hardest of all, their rhythm, their fictional rhythm, or sometimes not fictional, but just a sort of upfront memoir rhythm. But you still have to find their voice and not let your voice get in the way. So it really, really is hard. I compare it in orchestral terms to, if you're the novelist, then you're like God, you're like the conductor. You are just, whatever you say goes, and you're conducting, and this is your vision and your dream, and you are it. And the cellist or the violinist or the oboe player, even the oboe player in your orchestra has to pretty much dance to your tune. And that's what a ghostwriter is. A ghostwriter is that oboist in the orchestra who sublimates his or her oboe playing to the conductor's vision. And the conductor in this case is the client. And the client with a dream, with the goal, sometimes the contract, the book contract. And what you're doing is you're helping him or her to make that happen for them.
That sounds fascinating. I mean, as a musician myself, I think I can kind of grasp what you've said.
Yes, I'm sure.
And it's a really, really good representation, I think, of how to describe it. Yeah, it's excellent. And I suppose another one that came through is probably, a really interesting question, was more about what your plans might be for the future. I mean, are you hoping to do, some more ghostwriting or other types of novels, or, where do you see yourself?
I think I wasted a lot of years ghostwriting. I did enjoy them, don't get me wrong. I really did. There's a part of me, just as I've enjoyed teaching cello occasionally, especially older pupils, especially adult pupils. It's so rewarding. And there's a part of me that loves to help other people with their vision. I do think the time has kind of come in my own life to sort of say, just at the moment, at least, my daughter's left home. She's at university, and she doesn't need me the way she did. She probably never did need me. She's such an amazing person, so mature, so unlike me. Anyway, and I really think now's the time to just kind of push my own writing, to be honest. I'm not turning down every ghostwriting client that I get, but I'm thinking harder, and I'm trying not to get too distracted by the whole enabling bit. But at the same time, it has been an incredible part of my life. and I hope to come back to it. And I also feel that there's a wonderful balance. There's a wonderful balance in music, and you'll understand this because I didn't know you're a musician. There's a wonderful balance in music. Say you're playing chamber music, and you suddenly have the big solo, and you're the cellist with the big solo, and then the next minute you're just going boom, boom, and the person with the big solo is playing the clarinet, and you've got to be completely flexible in the way that you treat those two bits of music: the bit where it's you, and the bit where it is nowhere you, and you are just definitely just painted on the backdrop. So hopefully painted on the backdrop in a really supportive way, which is why I mentioned that about ghostwriting before. So at the moment, maybe a bit more, I don't know. Anyway, thank you for the people to ask the questions. I'm really, really, thrilled that you were here and thrilled to get a couple of questions.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Mika. You've been great.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'd just like to just kind of thank everybody for joining us this evening. And obviously, most of all, thank you to Alice for her amazing presentation and those excellent answers from some of those wonderful questions. So,
and good luck to you all. It's a journey worth making.